When we want to run our processing projects online so that we can share them with the world, the easiest way is to convert them to P5js. So P5js is a library that has taken and ported processing into JavaScript. So it's a helper library that allows us to write most of the same code that we write in processing, but it's now in JavaScript. We also have to then use the P5js library to go with it, and then that works out really nice. Now this is set up very similar to what we have in the processing website, where you can go through and look through the reference, so you can go study the reference that goes with it. So it kind of looks about the same as it does in processing when we're looking at the reference. A lot of the code is going to be very similar, but some is going to be different. One of the key things is when we are running a separate library like this inside our web browser and working on doing it locally, so we're doing our local development, we will run into some issues if we're not running it on a web server. So that's something that we're going to take a look at. Second, while there is the new editor that we can work with, this is now a perfect opportunity to start learning how we can just work with a standard code editor for doing web development. So when we're doing this, we're going to look at using a different code editor for writing the code. The same kind of code editor we would use if we were writing out our code for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and any other coding work that we would do. So some of the code editors out there, Brackets is a fantastic one. At one point Adobe had their own version of Brackets, and then they had the parallel open source one going. They abandoned their paid one, and that was part of the Creative Cloud, and now we just have the open source one. So a lot of people swear by Brackets and think it's great. Code editors are in what you could almost say is flavors, and different people like different flavors. When you go out for ice cream, some want chocolate, some want vanilla, some want pistachio, someone may want Superman ice cream. It all varies, and just saying Superman ice cream, the food dyes in that, wow, crazy. Enough digression there. So Brackets, some people like it. I've used it. It's not my favorite. There's some parts I do like about it, but other parts drive me nuts, and I don't use it currently. Sublime Text is one that I used for a long time. It originally was primarily written for Mac, and Sublime Text is great. Disadvantage is it's not free. It requires you to buy a license for it. The license is very affordable. It's a very well-maintained product, and it works great. Brackets is now open source, of course, so no cost. So I used Sublime Text for a long time, and then I tried Brackets for a while, and I didn't update my Sublime Text, but instead switched over and used Atom. And Atom is great, but it does have, I've experienced where if it's running for a while, it seems to get these kind of memory issues where it just stops working quite right, and you just need to quit it and restart it. So that, to me, screams that there's some sort of some issues of optimization going on in the program. So it's great. It works really, really well integrated with GitHub, because, well, they're same company, so it works really well. So Atom works fantastic, and I've been using that for quite a few years until very recently I switched over to using Visual Studio Code, and this is now my new favorite code editor to work in. I find it just works. It doesn't seem to have the issues that Atom did, and it has some really nice additional features without me having to add a lot of stuff to it. But all of these editors do have the option for doing extensions or plugins to them to extend their functionality that are produced by the community that give you additional features and functionality in your program and are worth including, because we will be adding one of those to it. So I am going to be doing my work in this demo using Visual Studio Code because this is my current favorite program for doing code editing. You're welcome to use any code editor you like. The process is going to be very similar, that you have to add in some of these extensions to make things work, like live server, except for brackets, which does have live server built into it. But I've not been a fan of the live server in brackets. Maybe it's better now, but in the past it just didn't work quite right for my needs. So Visual Studio Code is the one I'm going to be recommending and demonstrating all of the code in as we are going to write it. So back to P5js. So we can try out some things directly in it. So if you want, you can actually get started directly in the program. So you can just click and it opens up the editor and we can now start writing code. We'll notice this looks very similar, but instead of saying size, we have to say create canvas, because what is happening here is it's taking whatever we write in our code and it's writing it to a JavaScript canvas. So this is part of when HTML5 came out, it added in the canvas to our options, so we can now write directly to the pixels on the screen. So it's taking our content and writing it to the canvas. The canvas is a really great way to create visual content. It essentially gives us a fully paintable, pixel perfect controllable section on our page, and it works great. Otherwise, things are very similar, but we do have a few differences while we are working with this, and we'll be looking at those as we expand out the code. You'll notice we have this word function. We never used that in processing before. In processing, we would have said void setup. Well, the thing about working in JavaScript is we don't have to use return types. So we don't have to say what this is returning. A function can return something, it doesn't have to, but we don't have to put that into it. We also, now while we are working, in the past, in processing, I may have said something like int x. Well, there is no int here. Instead, I just do var x as part of what we are working on. We're also going to be able to be a little bit lazier, that if I forget to put the semicolon at the end of something or choose not to, that's okay, because JavaScript does not require a semicolon at the end of a line, unlike processing, so it's a little bit more friendly that way. So all of our variables we define with the word var. We don't have to specify the kind of variable it is when we are writing standard JavaScript. Some features of what is coined modern JavaScript, so ES6 and beyond, do allow us to type our variables so that we're able to get a little bit more control over the debugging process while we are working. So these are a few changes that we'll be looking at moving forward with it. How we define classes will be slightly different. The constructor is different in it versus writing it in processing, but otherwise things are very much the same. So now if I can just say int x is equal to 0, and now if I actually I'm going to, well, yeah, we can just leave x equal to 0, and then we'll draw a rect at 0, or at x, comma 100, comma, and we'll make it 50 by 50 here. Now if we hit run, we should see, okay, it drew a rectangle for us. Now, just like what we did in processing, I could just do x plus equals 1, and now we will see. So the code is the same. Code is code. We just have to change a little bit of how we write it. We don't have to say void anymore, or Boolean or string or whatever it's returning. It's just function to define out a function, and then we define our variables just using var as part of it, and then with that we're in pretty good shape. So now going back here, let's see where it says, okay, I'm going to download this so I can work on it locally, not work in the editor. And this complete library allows me to download a starter empty project, so it has some code and it's ready to go. So I can click and download that, and then when I open that up inside my code editor, this is now my code editor. Here is the empty example we can see, and there's an HTML file. The HTML file is going to then load my sketch. This sketch, this JavaScript file, contains the code that we would have written when we're writing it in processing. Now, if we've broken our project into multiple files, just like how processing, each time we made a new tab, made a separate file, then we would have to make sure we load all of those files. And we'll see how to do that as we convert the whole project going forward. Now, if I pull up the sketch and look at that, we can see, well, there it is. Pretty much what we saw, same as when we were online. So here, it's what we have in the code. So I have some HTML, it's loading this. Now if I want to open this up inside my web browser, so if I just go, and here I'll just double click on this, it opens up the file, and well, we don't have much in our sketch anyway, but it just says loading. Now one thing that we want to do when we're working is we probably need to inspect this so we can pull up the console on the side and look for errors. So if we go under View, now I'm in Chrome, and if you're in other browsers, you're looking for the DevTools. If you're in Safari, you have to first enable the DevTools before you can look at them. And what I want to do is pull up the JavaScript console, because anytime I have an error in my code or print out a message to it, using in processing we use println, in JavaScript we use console.log. So I pull that up and I'll see I get some error messages, and it's like not allowed to load these local resources, and this is, we're running into the fact that I can't load things locally on my computer, that it's trying to load this separate script file, the actual P5js library. That's where it's failing, when it's trying to load the library here and then load the the sound library. So that's causing some issues. So we have to run this off of a web server so we don't get the errors. I'm going to go into the sketch, and we will, at this point, I'm just going to I'll just create a canvas. So remembering, this is just like when we were here where we're doing create canvas, and then I'm going to just draw a rectangle so we can see that rectangle there. And sometimes code hinting doesn't help. So if it's trying to do that inside of VS Code, you can hit the escape key, and then that gets rid of what was there. So now I have updated this file. So I'll create a canvas, it's going to draw something, it'll look similar. It's not animating, but I don't really care about that yet. I just want to know that something is there. But we are going to be running into the problem that, it's not going to be able, I can reload this and, nope, not allowed. It's unhappy. So when we're inside Visual Studio Code, what we need to do is in the left-hand column, we need to manage our extensions. So it's this little kind of blocks. It looks almost like the fourth block is settling in to join the others. Now, I have a few extensions installed already. The one that I care about, and if you don't have extensions installed, and you can see here it's recommending ones to me, it's going, hey, you might want these. I'm like, yeah, maybe I do, maybe I don't. But I don't care about them right now. What I do care about is I would type in live server, and when I type that over here, we'll just make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's happening. It shows me different options, and the one we want is just the live server. Now, an important thing to look at is if you check how many times something has been installed, that gives you a pretty good idea of how popular or stable it is. And the other thing you'll want to look at when you click on a different extension as you add it is possibly its maintenance schedule. Has it been maintained recently, or is it out of date? Now, this live server has been downloaded 8.5 million times compared to like the HTML5 server or live server here, which is only 9,000 times. So that tells me that this one is probably going to be, one, really popular. A lot of people are using it, which lends it some credibility. So if I click on it, I can get the details here, and I can then start learning about it. and seeing how it works. And what's really cool is it will add this little line here down at the bottom called Go Live. And once I have this extension installed, all I have to do is click on that to fire up Live Server. Otherwise, when I'm trying to work with my extensions, I need to go under View, choose the Command Palette. In my extensions, I can choose the different extensions that I've installed. Beautify is another one that allows you to kind of clean up the formatting. That's the auto format we used in processing. And you can access, and you can also see if there's a keyboard shortcut that's already been pre-assigned to that. Otherwise, you can customize your shortcuts like in every program on your computer. So Live Server is super awesome here because now I can just click Go Live and it jumps over and it just, now we'll notice it didn't launch the file I had open. It instead, let's go back to my file list here, it launched instead the folder, the primary folder that I'm working with here. And that's what it opened. So we can see there it is. And then if I go into my empty example, we can see there it drew that box. And now if I right click and choose inspect, that pulls up the console. Well, it will when I click on console over here. Now I can see it doesn't have any red error messages. Now my Chrome likes to give me this DevTools failed to load source map, blah, blah, blah. And that's just a weird Chrome issue that I haven't been able to clear, but it doesn't seem to be impacting anything. So if I go back over here, I can type in background, and I could give a background of red, and save it, and boom, there it is. So we can see how that is working. So the code works, we're able to look at it, we can view it. Now, when you're done with this and want to take your project and share it, that means you're going to be putting it on a web server, an actual live web server, so it will be out there for the world to see when you put it on your website. So when you do that, you don't have to worry about using this live server extension because it will run just fine on the website where you put it. So this is only something that we worry about when we are doing local development. We could also put it on the default local server. If you're on a Mac computer, you automatically have a web server built in, an Apache server that's running, and you can put it into that folder. You can go research that or learn about that on your own if you're so inclined. You can use other local server tools like MAMP or WAMP if you're on Windows. Those work too. They give you additional functionality. If you're running a server like that, you can be doing a full run with PHP databases. So if you're running, say, a WordPress demo site where you're doing WordPress development but doing it locally on your machine, that's a way you can do it. But right now we just care about getting our JavaScript to run without any errors inside the browser while we're working locally. When we're done, we will upload these files to our web server of choice. And one option, if you are looking for something that is free, is to learn how to use GitHub. So GitHub, if you set up your GitHub account, you can then set up your different directories. You'll see I have a variety of different projects I've worked on over the years in my GitHub, and I can now make those projects. Actually, we'll go to my site. Oh, that's not mine. It's my YouTube. Here we go. There's my GitHub. And I can now go and put a project up here as a Git page. And then when I do it as a Git page, we can go and look at that link. So this now exists on GitHub. This is a little trig demo. And it allows me to have my web page running on this server. The GitHub one, it's free, which is nice. So I can now put my files up here and have my website running up on GitHub, so I don't have to pay for hosting or any of that. Disadvantage is, of course, I don't have my domain name running with it. So if I want a domain name, then I have to look at other options. You can pair a domain name with get pages, so there are some ways that you can do that, but that would be something for you to look at or for us to discuss at a different time. So if you're looking for something and you don't have a full website, but you want to get a project online so people can see it, setting it up as a Git page is a great way to do that. And learning GitHub is a fantastic thing because this is how a lot of companies are putting their code online for doing version control and collaborative code work. So getting familiar with and comfortable with GitHub is only going to benefit you when it comes to employment options. So back into our project, we can see here's the Git example. Here's where it failed when I see, if we notice, it now says I open a file, which is different here than I'm running a server. When we see the 127.0.0.1, that is the, in geek speak, that is home. So you can go find shirts that actually say that. It's like, take me home, and it lists that as the web address, but I digress. So P5js, super awesome. Code editor, I don't care what code editor you use. When you do your coding, it's whatever you like, and there's a bunch of other ones out there. These are ones that I've used for significant periods of time over the years. Brackets, it's good. Sublime is great. Atom's good. VS Code is, right now, to me, that's just my happy place that it's working really well. So that's what I would encourage you to do. So once again, we don't have to specify the return type on a function. We just use the word function instead. Instead of saying size, we use create canvas. And variables, we will use the keyword var instead of typing our variables as int, float, string, boolean, etc. So that's what we need to know to get started. So now I'm going to move into the next phase, which is to start building the conversion between my processing project and P5js so that we can see our project come alive on a web page. So right now I have a simple file which has a keyboard controlled player sprite or rectangle, so I can move around using the keys on the keyboard to get that moving around on screen. So it's the same stuff we've seen before. Our player has some variables, a constructor, an update method, and a display method, and then it checks boundaries so it can do the screen wrap on that, so when it goes off to the edges, otherwise keyboard. So similar kind of thing we've been working with previously. So what we're going to do is demonstrate how this can easily be converted into a P5js project before we tackle doing the larger game project. What I'm going to do is take these two files that I have, and I'm going to simply copy them and go into my P5js empty example. And well, I'm going to duplicate that so I can leave that example, and then this will be my P5. Now, one thing about this is where processing cares the name of our folder versus the name of the primary sketch. Because we specify what the JS file is loading, we don't have to worry about that here. So what I'm going to do is paste those two items in, and I'm going to rename these from PDE to JS. And yes, I want to use JS because I know what I'm doing. I'm an advanced user. I am an expert or something. It's just trying to help me there. Okay, so I've converted that. We've taken a look at it. And now, if we go back here, we'll see here is the file. So I'm just going to close that one. I don't need that open. Now in my P5 convert, I'm going to modify, and this will be my P5 convert demo. And we'll need to also put in player.js because we have the 2 files. We have to make sure we load those. You'll also notice we're loading the processing library and we're also loading sound. Now this project doesn't have sound in it, so we could get rid of that. We don't need it. We might as well just leave it as part of it. Now if I don't want this to be buried in the top left corner, I can certainly change the padding on the body. I can change my background color because this is just simple CSS, so then I can go and choose whatever color I want for the background. I can put that in there as well. And now at this point I can even go back here, get out of the empty example, and here's my P5 convert. I can open that up and we'll see that now it loaded the purple, but we're getting some error messages. And this is something that we're going to run into when we do the conversion, is we're going to see a whole pile of error messages as we work on doing that conversion. So here is the player file that we have that we will be making some changes. Now remember, as I said, we changed that to var on it. And in VS Code, if I hold down Alt or Option, I could actually select multiple things. So then you can do, and we'll find that it's going to be really useful moving forward with this, that we can select a lot. And we change, when we're doing a class, we change it to constructor here. Then we can just leave all of that as is. Now functions, when they're called inside a class, are methods, and they don't need void or the word function on it. So again, I can now hold down Alt or Option, select that, get rid of both of those voids there. Alright, so now we're going to save that out as part of it. Let's go back here and go into our convert demo. This is where we are going to have a lot more changes that we'll work with. Oh, we're not even using that string anymore. That was a relic. Get rid of that. So again, hold down Alt or Option, and then I'm just double clicking everywhere it said void and function. Okay, and look at that. All the red went away there. And now it sees that we're having an issue. So we need to fix our player class still, but our main code is now working in the main script until it got to line 5. And what is line 5? Oh yeah, create canvas. So by keeping the console open over here, I can, because my line lengths are short, move that over, and I'll just move this over a little bit. That way I can kind of see both while I'm working. I can see what is happening. So now right now we're having, it's unhappy with players, so this is where we need to fix working with the player. And now I realize I forgot one little thing here, which is I don't do my variables up here. Okay, so what I realized is after doing the example of typing the variables up top, I was thinking, oh yeah, I keep my variables there, but we don't. We can hide them. We don't need them. But when we add variables and we're inside a class object, one thing that we need to do is we need to say where that x belongs. Now width is a global value that happens when we create our canvas, just like in processing. But any variables or methods that we're going to reference that are part of the class itself, like x, y, width, and height, max speed, like this, all of these, now I Option or Alt click, just type in this dot. Now when I do that, now if I hit save, we'll see our error messages change, and it's like, hey, speed x, line 27. So one thing that's going to happen here is, okay, we got down here to line 27 because no key is being pressed, or left, right, or up, then that's where it registered that. So hold down Alt, I click, now I'm going to just go through, each of these. Now left and right, up and down, are global. They're part of the main part. They're not values that are part of this class or object. So think of classes as an object. So this player object has its own properties, x, y, width, height, x speed, speed, x speed, y. It also has methods of update, display, check, bounds. Those belong to this. So I type in this dot. Left and right, up and down, those are part of the main program, so we don't need to assign that. Now if you notice, I'm not trying to add this in through everything on the first go because it's really easy when you're doing all of this clicking for multi-line editing to do too many or mess up. So that's why I prefer to just do it in small chunks like this, because then I haven't spent a while adding it. Like right there, I just goofed on that one. Click on it, it goes away. Click over here, good. So this dot, repeat now here, notice again, height and width belong to the full spelled out words. Those are part of the main program. This dot. Now save it. Let's see what happens. And check bounds is not defined. Line 41. No, because when I'm calling this function, which is part of this object, this player object, so when I define it, as I did here, when I define it, I don't need to put the this on it, but when I want to call the method that belongs to this, and this is something that when we get more involved, where we'll have methods defined in our main sketch, like our different intersects, but then if we try and call something like that inside a class object itself, then that's going to cause an error message. Hey, look, now we're down to just the default one, and look, now I can press and move. Now, unlike processing, I have to click into that area to make it active so it knows that, hey, that's it, because when I'm over in VS Code, I'm doing stuff, and then if I just click here, this window isn't active, therefore it's not going to move based on that. So I've now been able to do a very simple conversion. Notice my variables, and that was still on my mind when I got to the play. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do that there, but I don't. The word function, no return types, create canvas instead of size. Otherwise, well, let's see, that's how that changed there. And in the player, we added in the word this a gazillion times, commented stuff out. And our class constructor, we used the actual word constructor instead of repeating the class name. Previously, we would have our file name, the class name, and then we'd repeat it as our constructor. All three would match here. Now we have our file name, class name, and then we use the word constructor to do it. And then it works. And then we've now successfully done our first conversion from processing into P5js, or what is in essence JavaScript. So I could now put this out somewhere and work with it. The next step will be to do our much more complex project of our game using sprites and sounds and everything, and convert that whole thing so that it works in JavaScript. So going back into our project, I have taken and put all of the different processing files. I've renamed them as .js files and put them into a copy of the MP example folder, called it P5 Games. So that's where I have my content. So now I'm just going to put a background color in, and I'm a fan of that blue-violet right now, so we'll keep that. The next thing is, well, I don't have that script file actually before I comment it out. I'll just copy, and I need to make sure I'm loading all of my scripts here. So let's see, we have block, enemy, and key, move, sprite, shoot. Yeah, I might want to rename that. That's pretty long, but it still works. Player, play rooms. And I mean, something else to keep in mind is it is now Sketch, we're not using that. But as we do this, we certainly can clean things up, combine things, we can make it longer. Because in processing it was useful to do that, but here we do end up with the mini map. So now if I go into this file right here, we'll see we have the mini map, which allows me to work my way through this a little bit easier. So we can see we have a bunch of things going here, and we're going to need to do some serious cleanup. I'm going to tackle this one last. So we'll go for some of the easier ones first. So remembering the creation of these. Now when we have a parameter, we just put the parameter. We don't need to say what it is. And where we previously had the class name, we just say constructor. And this time it'll be this dot interval and this dot start time here. Remembering that we can, don't have to, we can put semicolons, but we don't. It's not a requirement. When we have methods, those methods as part of a class don't need the function keyword as part of it. Now here where we defined a variable inside a method, with that is a time where we would then say var millis, we're grabbing that start time. It's where we need to say this dot. So one thing that we're going to find happens a lot is after we get all of this in, then when we try and run it, we're going to have to keep looking at the console in the browser. So we'll look at the console and we will find it tells error messages, and it's just a matter of we have to start closing them out one at a time. So it's not something where we can just do one thing and check it, which is frustrating at times because you're wondering, have I done this correctly? Now when I look here in this method, start time should be this dot because it's now a property here. And start time, I mean, if we want to give it a starting value, we could always just say 0. It doesn't matter because it doesn't get used until we call the start method. So that takes care of the timer class, so we can leave that. States class is going to be pretty straightforward to work with as we just clean up a series of functions. So these are all functions that we're working with. They're not part of individual classes. So unlike in timer, where we have methods here, everywhere it says void. Remember, alter option allows us to multi-select. Now we can just type function like that, and then that will put that in for me. So then I have that set up. So now we've taken care of that function. Now with colors, one of the things that we will need to do is we need to change our format a little bit. So going back into processing, I'm going to go into the reference, and one of the references, I'll click under fill. Now if we look at fill, if I use straight numbers, I don't need any type of quotes around it, but if I'm going to fill with a color name or a color value using the hexadecimal color notation, then I do need to put quotes around it. And JavaScript in most cases doesn't care single versus double, so you can use what makes you happy. Now the good part is if and let me just verify here, yes, we do use the hashtag or #. So I highlight that, and then I can just do, oh, I missed a letter, do a single quote around it, and it puts that in. We're going to worry about the music part last. So for now, I'm going to be commenting all of the music information out. The good part is, if you have watched the building the projects with processing, you realize that using the audio, it's not It's pretty straightforward, and the processing sound library is very much the same as the P5js sound library in terms of how we do things. There's a few other points we will want to keep in mind, so we do have to take that into account as we're doing it. So I've fixed the colors. I put in my function keyword for each of these functions. I'm just going to comment out the audio part because my hope is to get the project working without audio. Then we will go and add in the audio here. Now if I see where it says float, and I said that we can use var, and we certainly can. We also have other options in JavaScript where we can use let or const as part of defining our variables. We have moved in a lot of JavaScript into using let. Var used to be, that was the only way you would define a variable is with the keyword var. Now we can use let and const as well. And that's a much longer discussion that we're not going to get into right now. So I'm just going to switch these over. Typically use let where, ideally if you can use const, that's great. And then if that throws an error, then you switch over to let, or you just use let. Let will be more permissive than using const as a way of doing it. Now when I look through here, I don't see anything else. Oh, wait, there, I see. I should have gone and selected all of these in one shot. I'm just looking for the red underlines telling me where it's unhappy and it thinks that this isn't good JavaScript and it's going to be grumpy with me. So now I can save that. We're not using sketch, projectile. So here is the projectile. Projectile is going to reuse we'll be using this dot a lot as we define this. So once again, so we put in constructor. We don't need to type those values as part of it. Now we have these options here. In motion, speed, x, y, width, height, vx, vy, starting x, starting y, good. So I'm just going to comment those out. Now, once again, hold down Alt. And I will go through. So during this conversion process, it's really, really common to miss something while you are doing it, or you miss using one of the thises, and that will become problematic. And I could have alt-clicked, selected those, and then hit delete on all of them, but I didn't. All right, so get rid of that. That fill's going to work there. And when I look under here, when we're calling this method, just like in timer, where we had to say when we called a method, or no, we only called values, we didn't call a actual method from within it. Oh, that was in the previous demo. That's where I did that. But because check bounds is going to be right here, we'll be calling that. Looks like we've got a few more voids to get rid of and a whole lot more of this is to add in. But we need to put in this dot. Display, fill, this dot. Fire. So this dot x is new x, y, in motion, then we switch based on facing, and based on what's going on there, then let's go through and add in a whole lot more of thises. So this would be a fantastic opportunity for me to go on to random, relevant, or semi-relevant, or tangential, or even non-related topics as a way to pass the time or come up with something interesting to say. Unfortunately, while I'm doing that, it can sometimes cause issues in concentration, and then I end up messing up the values as I'm trying to do it. So we'll see. Some of these we might just put into fast forward and play a little elevator music in the background if needed to pass the time. Width and height are going to be sketch specific, so we don't need to add this to it because it's not part of it. Reset, we're calling that method right there. Call this dot. Okay, so now we have this one looking pretty good. We'll save it. And one of the other extensions that I did add in when we go into the command palette is Beautify, and if I choose Beautify this file, you see how it now cleans up and all my indents, everything are made a lot. Oh, we should have a closing here. And a closing comment here. So Beautify allows me to clean things up. And you can find Beautify in the extensions list, so click on extensions, search for Beautify. It's one of the common ones that you will want to add right away because it does allow you to clean up your code. There are different versions of Beautify depending on what language you're coding in. The standard one works for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's the one that I would be encouraging you to use right now. Moving into the next file. So Playroom 1 has a void on it. Playroom 2 has a void on it, and I think that's it. So then those both become functions. And fortunately, these are super repetitive as we're working with them. So that's going to be a little bit challenging. Now, these values, as we're referencing them, are not class values. These values are the values coming out of the main JS file that defines our whole project with setup and draw. So because of that, it's not a class, we're not going to go in and add a whole lot of thises. But what we are going to have to do is see everywhere we have an int on these loops, that's where we can change that to let. And then that works. So I'm going to, once again, everything that refers to sound, I'm going to temporarily disable it so I can try and get this working without having to go into sound yet. All right, so I've updated those. And there's no sound up there. And we're almost done with room 1. Just have a few more ints to change to lets as we work through. Turn off some music. And moving into the next one, I want to play the sound. And this is going to be very much the same since they are virtually identical. They're just working with different things. This is again where it's very possible that we could come up with a more generic way of describing what's happening within a room, and then we say in this room just use this group of enemies and this map, and then it would, but it'd be the same thing, we just pass it in. So we could theoretically come up with a code optimization that would allow us to just use a single one, but we're not going to do that right now. I'll save that for a future date. And now when I look here, I don't see anything else underlined or red. And this is why it is really nice using a program like Studio Code, because it does give me all of the things that I need. So facing and delay and offset loop frames, current frame, speed x, y, max speed, x, y, width, height. So all of these values are right there. And now we'll proceed to put in this dot once more onto it. This is a method, so it does not need the keyword. Oh, and player needs to become constructor. And that goes away, that goes away. Now we just need to add in on all of these items. Now left, right, up, and down are coming from the main program, so we don't change those. We just update all of these. And once again, I do encourage you, don't try and do all of them in one shot, because if you do, you start clicking wrong and then you try to undo and it just becomes a big mess. And then you have to retype everything anyway. If we're calling a method that is part of the function check bounds, then we put that there. Now this can be, instead of p vector, it's just let. And we'll just add these in down there. Max speed, X and Y get updated. Again, we're using this vector so we don't go double speed. I'll display as our method. Because we don't want to go double speed while we are working our way through a diagonal movement. Now again, if you modify your movement so that it only allows you to do one direction at a time and you can't be holding two keys, if you hold two keys it will choose whichever the second one is in the check, then you don't have to worry about using the vector as part of it. But otherwise we're in pretty good shape. Now the vector is defined a little bit differently inside of P5. So instead of saying new vector, we just use create vector and pass in the values that we want. So here, what we would instead say is let v equal create vector, and this dot speed x, this dot speed y. Whoop, didn't land in the parenthesis. Let me just drag that over. There we go. So instead, what took a couple lines, now we can just say v is create vector. Now the vector methods, if we go in and look at the vector methods, we will see we have multiply, which is we can take a vector and multiply it by a scalar value, which is our speed, and we have the ability to make it a normalized vector, so we take and make it a unit vector, so it has a length of 1 multiplied by that speed, so that's why we don't go so fast. So we create a vector with speed x and y, then we normalize it, multiply it by our max speed, and then we update x and y by the vector's x and y quantities. So we do update that a little bit so it's not as, it's going to play a little bit nicer. And with that, I think we've added all of this into it that we need to make it work. Now we'll go into enemy and we're going to repeat the same process. So we have xy width height, vx, vy, speed, current frame, loop frames, offset delay, then we'll have stored time and dead. Dead is false there. We're still using stored, yep, we are using stored time, so we will need to and now that we have, so if you notice, I'm trying to make sure that as we define everything in the constructor that it is represented there. Something else you will find that is quite nice while we're doing this is you do get code hinting. So if you notice, I started typing constructor and I got CON and I thought, I bet you want to say constructor, and it automatically gave me the rest of it. I just hit return on the keyboard to accept that code hint. So now let's go through and I'm going to get rid of all of the voids. Now we can get rid of those values, and the nice part is I will be able to utilize the beautify to clean things up as I go forward with this. But let's go and put our values in with our this dot. And something that's also nice about this is as we start doing this, we do realize that we do have quite a bit of repetitive, oh, I only got the O on float, there we go, that's better. We do have quite a bit of repetitive code throughout our program here, which tells us we have ample opportunity to clean things up, to improve what we're doing, to make our whole project better going forward. So, and let's see, new time is defined there, so it's not a this, but stored time is defined, so we'll put that in, and I think I'll stop right here, because now we have an int. We'll change that to let, because at some point, let's see if we're working with it. New time is there. We compare new time, stored time. All right, and once more, all of these kind of speed and positioning options do seem to get a little tedious as we have to add in this as part of it. But it works. It's not the end of the world. And moving forward with it, if you just work natively in P5js, then, well, this is how you would type it from the beginning, and then you'd be just fine and be like, what? It's all good. So we can save that. Go into the block. And block is super straightforward, which is nice. And now if I go and beautify this one, see how that cleaned that up nicely, got my extra spaces gone, things are all pretty. Okay, so we have gone through and cleaned up block, enemy, index, player, our room functions, projectile, sketch we're not using, states been cleaned up, and timer's been cleaned up. So now it's time to tackle the big guy here, and you can see on the side where it's telling us, it's like, yeah, we really are unhappy with what you have here, so why don't you fix that? All right, so we can do that. So we can say function, get rid of those. Everywhere we have float, we'll change it to let. Like that. And now we're good there. So it looks like we have lots of unhappiness going on that we need to update here. So I'm going to have to redefine all of those variables. Get rid of every void. Now, because I know void is only used in function return type definitions, I probably could do a find and replace on it, but I know I don't have that many functions here. So I'm not too worried about it. Okay, maybe a few more functions than I was thinking, but still isn't so bad. So this would be put our function in. And I'm just going to start at the bottom because, again, these are less to dive into, so it makes it just a little less overwhelming. So we're cleaning things up, right hand. And we could probably, because I'm fairly certain nowhere else in the program did we use the word float in any naming structure, we could even look for everywhere that it says float and just change that to let, and we'd probably be okay if we wanted to automate this and then just, if we get errors, track those errors down. But if you look down here, we get far less naming or red happening as part of it. Oh, I missed one right there. Looking on the side over here, using that as kind of a guide for what is wrong. So double click on the word, don't kind of click drag because, or shift drag, because then that selects all of it. Okay, so we are making good progress here. And I know we're not using that, so I'm finally going to delete it, leaving my code there, reset. Now all of these every time we used a loop, we need to fix that. So when we're using a for statement loop to go through, we have to change all those around. So again, everything with sound, we're going to minimize for right now. As I keep, now size became create canvas. I'm not going to come back to how we work with arrays is a little bit different here, so I'm going to come back to those in a moment. Trying to clean up important things first. Oh, no, those are arrays. So we're making progress. We have to define our arrays a little bit differently. And that's what we will look at here coming up. But right now we've made really good progress converting almost everything into the new form that we are looking for on this. You can see right here all the array options as well as the processing sound. We don't need to import it. And if If we look at index here, we can see we're adding the sound library right there, so we don't need to bring it in. It's already now going to be accessible to us, but we're going to comment those out for now. So arrays will be a little bit different. One, we don't have to say what it's going to be, but we can do let player images equal. And what that does is that now sets it up that that item is going to be an array. Let enemy images equal. So now here under enemies, let enemies equal. Oh, forgot my equal. Equal an empty array. So it's similar. So we could say let enemies and just leave it here and then say equal and then put it into it, but I like defining it here so we know that that's what this is going to be right away. And then just keep repeating the process. I'm going to, actually no, I'm going to only do the array item. Well, I'm going to just do the array items one at a time so I don't accidentally forget to add in that array part. So we're going to, this is not as quick, but that's okay. We don't always have to be super speedy in everything that we do. So now I've defined those. So now, as we go through here, and we're working with an image, and something that we're going to have to do on this that will also be a little bit different after we've defined everything, is we're going to have to add a preload function. And in this preload function, this is where we actually load our images, we load our sounds, all of our external assets, so that in setup we're just giving things their content as part of it. Now, things where we don't even have to specify how big the array is when we create this, we can, because we said, like up here, if we said enemies is an array, enemies 2 is an array, now when I go into enemies, I can just populate it right here. The enemies are enemies 2 arrays, so we don't even need these 2 lines anymore. So we'll be commenting some of that out. Well, will be, why don't I? So that's gone. Now the enemies go into my 2 different enemies array, players there, strings there, left, right, up, and down. We'll move to the new stuff there in a moment. Our loading, though, of loading actual images, these we will need to move into our separate preload method that we're going to work on, because if we don't do this, what's going to happen is when we try to use these assets, they won't be available to us at the start of our program, and that will cause difficulty. So before setup, function preload. Oh, and also notice when we're in VS Code, it gives me that closing curly. I was in processing mode, so I hit return twice and typed in my closing curly without even thinking twice. All right, so player images has been defined above. Because we're using these numbers of 12 and 16 as how many frames we're loading when we load it here, that tells me that I will need to add that in the preload as well. So these are loading. Enemy images has been defined. We don't need that defined anymore. So enemy frames, player frames, my 2 loops of loading those assets. I am going to currently just copy, comment out. We'll be deleting those and cleaning things up in a little bit. But this now loads these assets into these image arrays during the preload. So that makes sure that those images have been loaded ahead of time and will be ready to go. Now we can populate our enemy array, enemy 2 array, player, left, right, up, and down. space, projectile. Let's see what's going on here. New projectiles. Well, we don't need that anymore because we defined it as an array above, and now we were populating that array right here with the new projectiles. Next projectile 0, firing timer start, good to go there. Blocks, we defined blocks and blocks 2 up here, blocks and blocks 2, map 1, map 2. So map 1 and map 2 we will need to move up there, so we will need to find those at some point. Here they are. So we will want to move those right here. I'm just going to grab those lines there, copy that, comment out. Let's go back into the preload up here. Paste that in. So now we're, again, loading the assets inside the preload before my setup runs so that the assets will be available to use. That's really important. Now, blocks doesn't need to get defined because it was defined as a variable as a thing. Again, it doesn't, JavaScript doesn't care how many items are part of the array. We can add things. We can push and pop elements from our array, splice things in and out to our heart's content, and JavaScript is fine with the dynamically changing length of arrays. So some of the things we can do with arrays are a little bit easier inside of just plain JavaScript than they are inside of processing. Now when I look here, I see there's no error messages, so that's really exciting. That's really exciting that I have no error messages. We have this here, we have our loads. We commented out everything related to audio. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Notice here we have these sound files, so we have to, we're going to be dealing with sound. We don't say new sound file. We're going to, sound is done a little bit different. That's why I'm holding off on that until we get the rest of it working. Let's go here. I'm going to save that and make sure this is my active window. Now I go back here, and because I installed that extension, I can just click Live Server, and let's see what loads. I missed something because it's not playing, so I can pull up, I can inspect it with the console, which is Command Option J if you're on a Mac in Chrome, or Control Alt J if you're in Windows. And let's see. So let's see. Okay. Failed to load resource. All right. So I'm kind of thinking I may just rename this so it's a little bit shorter here. So I can right-click and choose rename, and I'll just call this main. And now go into my index. I'll not right-click. Save that. Okay. So I was pretty sure that I just mistyped something in the name. That name was too long. All right. So, and now look how nice this code hint is. It's telling me that I accidentally have written mouse pressed instead of mouse is pressed on line 12 in states.js, so please correct it if I wish to use that. Okay, so let me go back here, and if we look in the reference, and then I could I could search the page for it, or I can just scroll down and look for our events. We can see here, so if mouse is pressed, all right, and that's telling me that states line 12, so let's go states, yep, so I have mouse pressed, and looks like we're going to have more than one here. So, and it's capital I on is, so it's full camel case, so I am going to alt-click into each one of these. Is pressed. Now let's see. No error message. That's good. Click. Hey, look, there it is. And, all right. So I'm able to go between the rooms there. Keyboard's working, so those things all seem like they're working. Now let's figure out what else is going on here. I know I don't need that open anymore. Projectile seems to be working, so I'll hide that. Play rooms here. And when I press space, now we ran into a little problem. So let's see, playroom line 6. So we missed something. And this is going to be the challenge here, is now we have to go through one at a time and figure out why everything is not working or showing up inside the project. Now, one thing I'm noticing is I'm not getting any of my enemies to show up, and that's because previously when I populated my array of enemies, I said how many here, and then I used that length value to fill it out. So if we, similar to if we look here, we define player frames, enemy frames, use that. Here I was using the length of the array as I populated. So now if I just know I want, say, 3 enemies here, grab 2 enemies here as part of it. Now I save that and load. Let's click through, and now we can see the enemies are showing up. But we also, so collisions are working with the enemies because I lost enough health that I died this time, so that's good. But we are going through, so collisions are working, but with the enemies, but we do need to now work on the wall collisions to figure that part out. So we're making incremental steps here as we discover what is or is not working within the project. So we're able to get the enemies in. The images are loading. Our map is loading. So now we just need to work on the wall collisions, then we can add an audio and we'll be rocking. So now, because it's not colliding quite correct, I'm going to modify and say I want to see the blocks on screen, because the block has, when I look at it, the block has its display method. So now let's go here, and I don't see anything, but I am getting some information. So it's telling me it's expecting a number for the first parameter, received an empty variable on line 11. So, and if not intentional, this is often an issue with scope, but I don't think that's the problem. So line 11, rect this XY. So I'm looking at this, trying to figure out what's going on, and realize I did not define constructor. Now let's try again. And now we can see the blocks are there. Oh, let's try not to die so quick. And they can't get through, I can't get through. So now the blocks are working. So we can turn off that display on it because, well, that's ugly. So let's go back into our rooms here, hide the display. So incremental baby steps as we, so now when I shoot, we have to figure out why shooting is unhappy, and it looks like fire of undefined. So what that's telling me is if it's undefined when we go to shoot something, so it can't find the fire method for the projectile. So very likely it's an array method because we didn't define how many projectiles. We commented out that now if we said, number of projectiles equals 5, and then we put that 5 in there. So if I just go and say, let's put 5 in here, just like that. Now when I click to fire, we can see all 5 showed up at the bottom. The projectiles don't go through the wall, which is good. I kind of feel like I need to make it so that the enemies can go through the wall in this room, since everything seems kind of ghosty. So now we're firing. We're firing on all cylinders. Okay, that's a really bad joke. We're not firing on all cylinders. But this is part of that conversion process, that we recognize we have to kind of track these different things down by reading the messages it tells us and then thinking logically about the code as we're working with it and trying to get it to come together. So what we're left with now, we can fire, we have our images, we're colliding with everything, we're shooting, our game states are all behaving. Now we just need to work on setting up the audio and getting that to function. Going back up top here, let's uncomment that sound, and now we'll just choose, instead of saying sound file, didn't have it. Let's try again. So those are all now variables, and we need to make sure we're going to load all 5 sounds. So if I go down in my code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's go and grab these items here, copy that, and wander back up into my preload up here, paste, and now as I've put that in, we need to load those sounds. But instead of saying new.sound file, what it's going to instead look like is load sound, and it'll look just like that. We can clean it up. So that's what we need to look like. So now that I know that's what I want, just like load image, load sound, I'm going to alt drag and select all of these items here so that I can replace them with load sound. So that's now loaded my sounds into my project. Now there's a few other things that we may want to take into account while we're working with this, because we're putting it on the web, and that's the form. Now we've only created MP3s, but if we want to make this work on all browsers, we would have MP3s and OOGs as our file formats, and then we could say those are our sound formats, and then the browser that is being used can decide which version to use. But because I only have the one, that's what I'm going to work with. Now to see the reference on this, if we go back into processing here, it's under libraries. And under libraries, we'll see there is sound here. Now if we go into sound, we can see where we load the sound, but we also call sound formats, and then we can specify the sound formats that are available to be used. And again, notice it's in our preload here. This is where we do it, and then we can tell the sound to play whenever we want it to play. In this case, if I click here, it plays a doorbell sound. I'm not really in the mood to hear the doorbell right now, but we know that that could work. So I've loaded the sounds. I don't have other formats. With all those load sounds done, now what I need to do is go through and find where I've specified things. Now we can just stop right here and click that, and we can see how it's loading. And right now it's a little bit unhappy with that particular sound file, so we'll have to figure out what is going on with that. And this is why we do it kind of one item at a time. Let's see if there's any more information here. Not really. Well, after doing a little research, it turns out that there is a bug currently in P5js for doing sound, and it gives an error message. There are some workarounds that seem to be tied to specific browsers. Some people are getting it to work in Firefox, but a lot of people are having issues with it. So it seems in the current version of P5 Sound that there are some issues. So with that, what we're going to do is go back and comment out working with the sound. So I'll comment out the loading of that. I'm going to comment out the actual sounds that I'm putting into it. I go down and make sure I'm not trying to steal, so I don't have the game music playing right there. So we can save that, and now. I did quite a few kind of experiments and tests trying to figure out why it did or did not want to work, and it seems that the sound object loads fine when you try and play it back. Even though it says the sound has a duration, it still fails. So with that, we'll save it, and now we'll see, here I am, and I must have only commented out I commented it out in room 2, but not in room 1, so let's try again. So now it seems like it's working. So for the time being right now, we will just stop using sound in our P5js projects. Could probably just use straight web audio and load audio, or use, instead of using the P5 library, we could use the HTML5 web audio API and load sounds that way. But we will save that for a different time.